This is A Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders, welcome to episode 117, and we've got Mike Burrows back on the show talking about his new book, Right to Left. You might remember we had Mike on the show back on episode 81, where we talked about Agendashift, we talked about Kanban and Agile. In this conversation, we dive more into leadership with Agile principles. We talk about a little bit about digital transformation. We talk about having an outcome-oriented approach versus just going through the process. We talk a lot about servant leadership, and one of the quotes that he said in there that I really liked was experience before explanation. So the idea that experience will give you more than just explaining something if you can show somebody something. So it was a really good episode. And Mike's new book, Right to Left, is just been released on Amazon. August 15th, you can pick that up. You can check it out at geekleader.com, and we'll have some links there. We have a section that we just put out there a couple weeks ago called Books from Our Guests. You can check that out. It's books from all the different people we've had on the show and things that we recommend that we've talked about on the show. You can go check those out and link directly to them so you can purchase them and check, hopefully you'll enjoy them like I do. But with all that being said, give it up for Mike Burrows.
Very good, thank you. Busy, obviously. Has two books in the space of just over a year, but I obviously enjoy what I do.
Yeah, it's been I remember after our last episode, I had somebody come out to me and said, "Oh yeah, I know Mike," and I was like, "Wow, it's amazing that I interviewed someone from the UK here in Charlotte and run into people that know you." So, if you don't mind, we've had a lot of new listeners since our last episode. My number of downloads have almost doubled since then. So, if you don't mind, tell the audience just a little bit about kind of how you got started, what your background is, and kind of what you're doing today, just for anybody that didn't listen to that previous episode.
Sure. So my background in software development, I started in flight simulation of all things a long time ago. Got into software tools and eventually into investment banking. So I was worked for a number of banks. I was an executive director at UBS, global development manager, that kind of thing. And then I left in 2009 when a lot of people left the banking industry. Probably the less said about that, the better. Became CTO of a late-stage startup in the energy risk management space. And little did I know at the time, but that was going to be my case study for my first book, Kanban from the Inside. We were doing Kanban there. I sort of was quite well known on the mailing lists and through my blog for what I was doing there. And so that in the end was the seed for a quite significant career change. The real sort of moment of clarity was a blog post I wrote in 2013, basically around the New Year's holiday of 2013, introducing Kanban through its values. And what I'd done was come up with a values model for Kanban, and it gave me a fresh way of explaining something, perhaps arguably a more sort of humane way of describing what to people from the outside had seen as a rather sort of technical tool, something for the tool heads. So it was good to have that perspective. That blog post became my first book, Kanban from the Inside. And it's sort of taken me down an interesting path, went from values to needs and outcomes. And credit for that probably goes to government digital services in the UK. Government digital has been a very exciting space to work in the UK for a number of years. Look, from this side of the Atlantic, I see that there's some interesting things happening over in the US now, and I wish you luck with that. Yeah, done well. It can be amazing. It was actually a privilege to work on the two government digital services I worked on.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a great opportunity.
Yes, no, it genuinely was a privilege, and it was so different to my expectations of working in the government sector. Principle number one for government digital services was start with needs. And that's got me thinking a lot about how we think about Agile and how we think about transformation. So when I was last on, I was talking about Agendashift, and that's a book about outcome-oriented change and continuous transformation is the subtitle of the book. But it kind of leaves a hole by design. I decided I didn't want to spend a lot of the Agendashift book describing what Lean and Agile mean.
Mm-hmm.
I decided this was going to be a book for practitioners who kind of ought to know, but also it helped me write Agendashift in a sort of framework agnostic kind of way. And I didn't want to have to write, part of the book addressed at Scrum people, part of the book addressed at Kanban people, safe people, whatever. And I actually think it's a better book for it. And the Agendashift tools are better for being framework agnostic. But it did leave a hole in the middle, describing the Lean Agile space. So what does that look like? What does it mean? What actually is Lean? What is Agile? What happens when you put them together? So that's one important job to do, but also a huge opportunity to describe Agile in an outcome-oriented way. And what happens when you describe Agile, not starting with things like backlogs and slicing and all those kind of things, kind of things on the left-hand side of your picture of Scrum, but you start on the right with needs and outcomes being met. And it turns out to be a useful new perspective. And I've written a whole book where I very deliberately, very explicitly maintain that sort of right to left perspective, one that starts from from the end result working backwards.
So why did you go with the term right to left? Is it just because that's where you're starting, like the end, or was there some other kind of meaning behind the right to left?
There is a meaning behind it. It's kind of an in-joke to some people, and it's also one of these phrases that people think, what does that mean? and I hope it catches people's imagination. So it kind of means it means two things, but they are very closely interrelated. So the in-joke is for people who know Kanban, a well-known trick that people either taught or they learned from themselves, that the best way to review a Kanban board is right to left. So your sticky notes on the right, the things that are done, are they going to stay done? Sometimes they're like these gophers that you have to keep bashing down. But other things we just finished, are they going to stay finished? But also more interesting questions. What are we learning about the things that are now out there with our customers? And what do we learn through the process of producing those things and so on? And so each of those stickies are representing an opportunity for reflection and learning. Then working backwards from the finished things, what have we got just ready to go? Why aren't they out there yet? What's stopping them from going out there? How continuous can we make this flow of stuff to our customers? What's in test and any issues there? How are we testing it? Who's testing it? In what environment? What's happening in development? Are there things that we can do while still in development that will help us, check that we are on the right track, that this is really going to meet needs? What have we prioritized and why? What impact do we think they're going to have? And so on. So starting from the right, it really, from a the most mundane level, stop starting, start finishing. It does help keep people and teams, focused on finishing, not focused on starting stuff and actually making the delivery problem worse rather than better. But there's as well as that sort of technical thing, and the in-joke is also the idea that we want to start, almost to the right even of the board, with needs being met, outcomes realized. I have a slightly tongue-in-cheek, deliberately subversive definition of done. So my definition of done is someone's need was met, and that implies that whose need it was, what that need is or might be, and how well you've met it. And if your process is actually geared up to focus on that moment. And I won't repeat the story from my first book because I probably said it on the last podcast, but it actually has a profound change on your process when you start to think in those kind of terms where everything is focused on that. Not just on getting things to done in the sense of code complete or tested or deployed, but done in the sense that it's actually meeting people's needs.
I totally agree with you. I've worked for leaders in the past where code complete was basically done, and they would check that off the list. I said, but if nobody's using it, it's not done. If it's not, they say, well, it's in production. I'm like, well, it's not in production until they start using it. Just because it's on a production server doesn't mean that it's actually production. We still got to point DNS to it. People still got to start using it.
Yes. Well, those are good questions to have, good challenges to make, and kind of what I've done is follow those thoughts through to their logical conclusion. And it's been helpful. It turns out that most of the key frameworks out there can, to some greater or lesser extent, be described in those right to left terms, in outcome oriented terms, and in doing that, it helps you see how they complement each other, and support each other. My favourite example is Scrum, which is very easy to describe left to right. Starting with backlogs, 2 level of backlogs, planning events to take you from one to the next, and so on and so on and so on until you get to your potentially shippable increment, whatever that means. Or you can describe it right to left. Our shared objectives pursued goal by goal. And working backwards from there, where your sprint backlog is your best understanding of the work needed to achieve your current goal, and you've got options for future goals in your product backlog. That's not the most typical. To put it mildly, that's not the most typical description of Scrum. But yeah.
Have you gotten any pushback from the Scrum purist on some of the things that you talk about and do when it comes to your having a book that was kind of framework agnostic? Was that did you ever get any pushback from that?
Actually, the opposite. I made a point of actually testing my left to right and right to left descriptions on people, and people I respect in the Scrum community, and after that the Safe community as well, interestingly, and got a very, very positive response. So it's the sprint goal is a undervalued element of Scrum, and it's treated almost like an advanced topic, a way to bring your sprint planning to life if it's struggling. But when you look, you talk to the product people, and you look at where the product space is going with things like roadmaps and things like this as well, and people understanding that roadmaps should be expressed in terms of outcomes. You start to seeing actually there's a nice synergy there between that way of thinking about product road mapping, and from Scrum thinking about goals for sprints, and it helps you delay until the last possible moment the hard decisions about how things are going to work, and it stops you designing things too much up front. It leaves you freedom to find the right solution at the time. It gives opportunities for collaboration between product people and development people, and so on.
Have you noticed that some people struggle sometimes switching their mindset and their terminology to thinking about outcome-oriented results versus tool-oriented or system-oriented or framework-oriented terminologies? Is changing that mindset difficult?
That's a very good question. I kind of answer it in two ways: thinking about it from a development process point of view, and thinking it from a change and transformation point of view. Mm-hmm. As I said, the government digital projects I worked on, it was a privilege to work on them, and start with needs was just such a big thing for us that as teams we bought into it, and we had such huge respect for people doing things like user research, and we took the stories of our users very, very seriously. There was a richness to things like personas that developed over time as we spoke to more and more, real people, rather than just, making them up at the beginning of the project. All of that was happening, and it's wonderful to see, and it's very gratifying when you start to get feedback from the real world that what you're doing is actually, making things better. So that's my sort of benchmark as far as teams are concerned. As far as the sort of change side of things and getting people thinking about outcomes, that's exactly what my Agendashift workshops do. And it's a very actually quite easy to at least I've done it lots of times now, but easy to facilitate, I would argue, or at least natural process. That without using words like outcomes, without talking even about lean and agile, just helps people articulate what it is they want to achieve, and just starting from the obstacles that they want to overcome is actually a very good place to start. Everyone likes to talk about things that don't work, and you can then explore what's hiding behind those obstacles. And this is something that's an art that we've refined for the workshops. This is ground we probably covered in the last podcast, but there are ways of not just as the facilitator questioning people to get them to articulate things, but actually teaching them how to ask each other how to do this.
And so, from a leadership standpoint, what should leaders be? Doing or thinking, or how can they, get their employees and folks involved in something like this?
Well, for one thing, is practicing some of it themselves. If leaders are focused on outcomes rather than telling people how to achieve them, that's a better kind of leadership. That's teaching them out of habits of micromanagement. It's encouraging teams to collaborate around the goals that are being set for them, and so on. And actually, it's the last chapter of the new book. In fact, is on leadership. It's called Upside Down. Which is in the same way, right to left. It's sort of a metaphorical reference to the inverted pyramid and servant leadership and this kind of thing. And understanding that the leader's job is to support people who are actually doing the delivery work, supporting people that are serving their customers and so on. But one very important way in which leaders provide support is actually in providing clarity around goals and clarity around outcomes. It was, I think, Stanley McChrystal in Team of Teams who said that one of the job of leaders is to keep articulating goals until they're bored of saying it, and then keep doing it. That's how you get people aligned on the right things.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I like the concept of servant leadership. And I've heard different people say kind of it means different things to them. What is it that servant leadership means to you?
So I have a sort of servant leadership in 3 bullets. I went to a servant leadership conference a few months ago in the UK. And there were a few people who tried to define it, and a few of them did it in like 3 bullet points. Ours weren't identical, but they were certainly compatible, and I think that's because the people who are serious about it, they go back to the source, and they've read Greenleaf and people like that, and it's a much bigger, deeper, much more ambitious thing actually than just serving the team, which I think is kind of the kind of what you're taught in your Scrum Master training. But it's helping people to be successful, and removing obstacles that are in the way of people being successful, and it's also creating the next generation of servant leaders. People are going to do these same things after you've gone, and so it's. There's actually a really clever bit of systems thinking behind servant leadership. It was understanding that the world was changing. It was written in the 1970s, the book, the servant leadership book. And Greenleaf recognized that people weren't going to be in jobs for life, a few years later. And it turned out to be true. So it was very prescient. And he realized that as soon as people had choice in who their employers were going to be, they would choose the employers that served them the best. And you start thinking about not just how does our organization serve our employees, but how does our organization serve its customers, and even how does our organization serve society. So some really big thoughts in that book. It's a hugely inspiring book. I've read it multiple times. And I did a series of blog posts of how long ago, 3 years ago, something like that, bemoaning the sort of neutered version of servant leadership that gets taught these days. And going back to the sources, it's as I say, it's inspiring.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And Greenleaf has kind of been like the I guess the kind of the gold standard of defining that and helping us out. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed with my team. Whenever the focus goes on helping the person as an individual, team member, and not necessarily like, how can I make all of this team look good? Let's focus on how I can help you with your career. That's one of the things as a manager that I do is try to have at least once a year, twice a year, focus on how can we better your career? What do you really want to do? The things you said last 6 months still the same, or have things changed? Where do you want to go? And I think just having that little bit to where the person knows that, hey, my manager has my best interests at heart, makes a huge difference in their outcome and their productivity.
Yes, but if also you take that to the next level and are encouraging themselves to be encouraging the people that you are leading to themselves be servant leaders, you are also encouraging things like collaboration and so on, and teamwork. So it's a thing that's very compatible with Agile.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a nice version of leadership that's compatible with Agile. I think it's actually something that that helps make it work, and something that's potentially transformative in organisations and so on. I've worked in organisations. Well, I've worked for managers that have shown that kind of commitment to me in my teams and so on, and that is wonderful. And I hope that most of the people that worked for me would be able to say the same.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question from a technical manager or leader's life journey. Let's say we're in our company, we're working, and our CEO heard something at a conference or read something somewhere and said, "Hey, we need to go through a digital transformation. We need to be more lean and agile." How do you take what he says, and how would someone be able to explain to other folks within the business, other maybe executives, when you've had kind of a company that's done things in a waterfall method in the past, to understand what is lean and agile, and how are those two things the same or different?
I don't necessarily start with teaching or explaining. What I like to do is to get people into a room. And when I say people, the more people, the better. But my recommendation is at least 3 levels of seniority. Just having a leadership team in the room is not going to be as authentic as it will be when you have people doing the delivery work in the room as well. Or if you have a team and its manager, having some having some sponsorship and some customers in the room as well is also healthy. I think it makes it more real, and it shows a level of commitment that you wouldn't see, if you don't have that, diversity in the room. People with skin in the game, people representing a variety of skills and so on. It all helps. The way we start off with the workshop, the 2 exercises that we do, and they're both open source, so you can easily find them on the Agendashift website. The first one's called Celebration 5W, and the 5W stands for the who, what, when, where, why. The classic journalistic questions. And it's the who, what, when, where, why of the celebration we're going to have, some months down the line when we've made something super exciting happen for this company. And at this point, I'm generally not focused on the transformation so much as the business, business meaningful objectives that Agile will support. I tend to avoid getting involved in culture change that's not also tied to something very meaningful for the growth or survival of the business. Culture change in absence of delivery seems a bit sterile to me, and I hear lots of stories of it running out of steam because people are not clear about actually what they're trying to achieve. So I've had celebrations that have mentioned things like £1 billion in turnover, or millionth registration and things like that. So significant business goals. Some have been around strategic changes of direction. Some have been a bit more close to home in terms of transformation. But as I say, I tried to make it things that the business would want to dip into their pocket and pay for a decent celebration for. So that's kind of setting the scene in some business context. And then the True North exercise, very simple. We reflect on words that say, imagine everyone able to work consistently at their best. Individuals, teams, between teams, across the organization and beyond. The right conversations between the right people at the best possible moment. Needs met just in time. Now you'll notice in that statement an absence of the words lean or agile.
Yeah.
But you also do get a sense of people working together collaboratively. I steer very close to mentioning just in time, which is a piece of lean jargon, but I said just at the right moment, needs anticipated and words like that. So people just reflect on that just for a minute or two, and however excited or not they are by it, and I have had some people genuinely excited by it. So I had a team it was a non-profit, well-known, internationally known non-profit, non-technical people, very noble cause for this organization. All the staff very bought into why this organization exists, and there are no issues at all about purpose or anything like that. But their working practices just weren't working for them, and people very frustrated. And they spent, I gave them the usual, a couple of minutes to reflect on this statement, and then they asked for another couple of minutes, and then they asked for 5 minutes, and like 20 minutes later I'm wanting to get them on to the next part of the exercise, which is just to think about, well, what obstacles are in the way of that. So from and I've mentioned before, once you've got obstacles, thinking about the outcomes that are hiding behind those obstacles is a very easy thing to do. And I teach people some coaching questions that explore that landscape of obstacles and outcomes, and that's then gives us lots of raw material that we can organise in various ways. So we're already thinking, actually, we're beginning to put a strategy together for that are actually moving us in the direction of this true north, which is, agile and lean inspired. So that's not a bad start, and we've not been teaching people. This has been people working out for themselves what it is they would like to achieve. There are things that we can do that are more educational, and things like, the Changeban and Featureban games, for example. Ways to teach people about flow and about hypotheses, and all these kind of lean agile type things. There's an assessment that we can do, and that's based on 6 of the 9 values of my model, and that takes people down to a lower level of detail and helps them realize some of the things that they can achieve at team level or between team level, things that without being prescriptive about agile practices or agile frameworks, does start to give people some clues about what kind of outcomes could be achieved if they change some of their ways of working. So that's how actually I do it. In the book, the book's a bit different. I have an ambition to turn the new book Right to Left into a workshop, but I haven't put that into. I haven't quite worked out how I'm going to do that yet. But I do have things like my one-line description of Agile. People collaborating on the rapid evolution of working software that is already beginning to meet needs. So you can kind of check off the Agile Manifesto values in that sentence. And you'll see also it's quite a modern commitment to continuous delivery in that statement. And it's right to left in the sense not just that it's focused on meeting needs, but also that this is already happening. We're an agile team not because we've started with a backlog. We're an agile team because we're making this work, for the benefit of our users and in a way that's working well for us. So, if I suppose that's another answer to your question. How do you teach agile in a way that's different? Well, right to left is a written attempt at that. How to deliver that into organizations other than just handing out piles of books is something I'm still to work out. But that's a fun challenge.
Yeah. So when does Right to Left come out? Like when can people pre-order that or get it?
It's pre-orderable now, certainly on Amazon, and a few other. The print book certainly is pre-orderable in a few other places, but on Amazon you'll find both the print edition and the Kindle edition, and it comes out on August the 15th. So by the time people are actually listening to this podcast, it may well be out already.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think it will go out the day before this podcast goes live.
Cool.
So everybody listening, go out and get it. It's available.
Just search Right to Left Mike Burrows on Amazon and you'll find it. You'll have no problem.
Yeah, we'll link it up in the show notes as well. And I had actually two more questions. One, have you noticed that whenever you explain things that way to people to where they kind of come to the realization themselves of what the outcomes can be, do they grasp it better than if you just kind of give them definitions and books and teach them like a lecture to them?
Absolutely. I have a phrase I use. I think it's found its way into most of my books. Experience before explanation. And it's actually in the teaching notes for the Featureban game and probably the Changeban game as well. When I'm teaching Kanban, start with the game. When you're talking about flow and blockers and impediments and all those kind of things, it means so much more to people when they've actually experienced it. For many people, playing a good simulation game, and there are others that are available, not just mine. I remember the first time I played Get Kanban, and it was quite eye-opening. I mean, even though I'd worked in an environment where things actually flowed pretty well, to see things flow in the space of minutes was really, really cool. And to also sense the frustration that people feel when things aren't flowing as well as they should. And games, they heighten that sense, and that's really cool. And then, the time for explanation is afterwards. You don't explain Kanban by starting with Little's Law. Or it's a history lesson about Toyota. Get people getting a feeling of what flow actually feels like. What's special about Changeban and Featureban is that it allows people to realize for themselves before the facilitator points it out to them that there's a relationship between the amount of work in progress that you have and the collaboration that you experience on your teams. That's people who've worked with Agile teams will know instinctively. And it's a different lesson to the one that people expect. People are expecting a lesson that's limiting your work in progress will reduce your lead times, which is true or usually true. I give a more complicated technical answer than that based on the maths. But actually, the fact that reducing your work in progress improves collaboration in your teams is a profound learning for people. And that more than anything else, tells me why some of the techniques of Lean and of Agile, of Kanban, of Scrum, why they are so important.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That's one of the things I've seen when I changed jobs a while back. One of the biggest things that I saw holding back my new team was the fact that they had too much work in progress. And the culture there prior to my arrival was more of a thought that if we can tell our boss that we've started something, then they won't nag us about it as much. But starting something doesn't mean it's done. Let's focus on what's done and getting things done. Like you said,
there's a piece of advice I often give, and it's just decide what to finish. And if a team can decide what to finish and stick with it. I remember having a conversation quite recently in the Agendashift Slack about a problem with an institutional level problem of work in progress, and also lots of dependencies between teams and so on. But if just a few people, as an act of leadership said, right, this is going to get finished, and worked out what had to be done and what collaborations were necessary to get it done, within their teams and across teams, they'll start to make it a better place. And you start to make it better. You start to build trust with your customers. You start to work out what's wrong with your systems, and all those good things follow. That's a very informal way of approaching Lean and Agile, but it's not a bad place to start when you are just overwhelmed. And it's amazing how many teams are suffer greatly from being overburdened.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think the more things you've got in progress, also there's like this. I heard Todd Henry. He wrote a book called Accidental Creative, and in that book, he talked about that we had 4 finite resources: focus our focus assets, time and energy. And I think whenever you have a lot of work in progress, your focus
Yes, and so much of
is
that time
stretched
and
too
energy
thin.
gets wasted on stupid things like context switching,
Absolutely.
picking up the pieces and fixing all the things that broke because other things were changing and all the rest of it. Teams. It's not just individuals. This isn't just personal productivity. If whole teams are focused on on finishing something, on achieving goals, pursuing their objectives goal by goal, as I said for Scrum, that's, when you get that, exciting things can happen.
Yep, absolutely. So another question that I had was with a lot of your information that you put out there, you make a lot of it open source. Why is
Yes.
that? What benefit do you have, or do you see for doing that? Just putting it out there and letting people get it, and take the information in some of your workshops and try to do it themselves. So what value do you see from that?
I get multiple benefits from doing it. There's the mundane, slightly selfish benefit. People approach me saying, "Can I have your stuff?" And I say yes. And by the way, would you like to go on my mailing list? And most of this happens electronically, but you'd be amazed at the number of people that I'm now in, aren't just on the mailing list, but I now know through things that I've open sourced, and that then leads to the another very important benefit is that so much of what I do has benefited hugely from collaboration.
Yeah.
So the tools improve, people contribute translations, adaptations. I made a bit of a song and dance about version 3 of Featureban. And that was basically incorporating things that other people were doing for quite a long time before I finally realized that what they were doing was better than my version. Using cards rather than coins and things like this. And I incorporated their ideas and polished it up, and with other input and some quite explicit user testing. We used one of the advanced workshops actually to road test some changes. So it's a real source of improvement, and I found that attitude as it helps attract good people to the community, and people feel that they can not just use the stuff but make a contribution, and people find that a meaningful thing to do. And I never tire of sharing the credit around to people that have helped make either the individual tools or the the framework as a whole what it is. And sometimes even new things come along that I had no hand in creating, but were just such an amazingly good fit for Agendashift that we've kind of taken it under our wing. So recent example, Carl Scotland and Liz Keogh came up with a tool inspired by Wardley mapping. And it has been a wonderful fit for the mapping part of Agendashift. It's the second morning of the 2-day workshop, and we got this string of exercises that were kind of in 4 points through this new exercise through to something that looks a bit more like story mapping. And it's the same sticky as moving around the wall in these different shapes, but we learn new things about our ideas, about our strategies. Through these different perspectives, through these different mapping exercises. And if I hadn't open sourced my stuff, Carl actually was a big influence on me, taking Cynefin seriously in Agendashift. Liz was. Liz, is well known as a Cynefin champion, was excited to see how well my 15-minute photo game, which is the coaching game that generates the outcomes, how well that feeds into the Cynefin 4 points exercise. Awesome. And without, I wasn't there. They were at map camp. I wasn't, and they sort of came up with the idea in a corridor conversation, which is why you go to conferences. So that was all very cool. So yeah, short answer. I know far more people than I would have done if I hadn't open sourced it, and with some of those great people, there have been some important collaborations as well.
Awesome. So, how can people, grab some of that content or connect with you in other ways? I'm looking up the book on the on a Geek Leader podcast show notes, so it'll be in there as well. But how are some other ways people can connect to you and maybe get some of that content and
I'm pretty easy to find. So agendashift.com there's certainly a contact page there. There's a resources page with a ton of open source resources and some other things that you can sign up for, things like the assessment tool, the Agendashift partner program, things like that.
Awesome.
There's also events. So I got a series of workshops in the autumn around Europe at the moment. I don't actually have a US date in the calendar at the moment, but we'll fix that sometime soon. That's Agendashift.com is the place to go. On a page for the books as well was the other thing I was going to mention. So you can take a look at all three books, perhaps get some idea of how they fit together. I will be putting out a blog post and a mail shot on the 15th, on the day of the book launch, with a little more insight into the connection between the three, and with more description of the why I wrote the book in the first place. And
awesome.
That'll be on the blog, which is also easily found from from agendashift.com. There's a Slack community, which I've mentioned already, and a LinkedIn group as well. So the Slack community is the place where conversations happen. The LinkedIn group is kind of the place of record. Blog posts go there, and any important announcements go there. But the place where the cool stuff happens is Slack.
Awesome. So, definitely head on over, guys, to Agendashift. Sign up for the newsletter. I signed up, and check out the book when it comes out. I've got thank you so much for sending me an early copy, and reading through it. It's great stuff. I highly recommend it, and we'll put that up in our on geekleader.com on our books that we recommend page. So it'll be there as well. But thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, fantastic. And thank you. I've enjoyed it too.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Mike Burrows. And if so, please head on over to Apple Podcast or Twitter and leave me a message or leave a review. Reviews are awesome. And speaking of reviews, I'm going to read one real quick. This one is also from someone from the UK. It's from, I hope I don't butcher this name. Maybe I will. I don't know. Either Cy Pryor or Cipper. But anyway, it says, I first heard John's podcast when he was a guest on Simple Leadership Podcast. I really enjoy the way John interviews his guests and talks about experiences in leadership too. I look forward to new episodes. It is really helping me become a better all-around leader. Thank you so much for that. It means a lot to hear reviews that are, they help encourage me to continue to do the episodes, to continue to bring awesome guests on, like Mike and others that are out there. But also don't forget, head over to Amazon, get the Right to Left book by Mike Burrows, and feel free to shout him out on Twitter that you heard about it on the podcast. That would be awesome. I'd greatly appreciate it, and have a wonderful week.